When we left off, we were talking about ELL students and engaging families. It's important to realize that not everybody has the ideal situation, whether it's at home or at school, just based on their experiences. Some people come from other countries and they have different experiences, and we have to acknowledge that. But sometimes we'll have students who are even born right here in Nashua and know nothing else but Nashua, who still have issues that we need to see, we need to address, and sometimes they're not always that visible. So to speak about how to incorporate trauma-sensitive practices in our interactions with students and how that affects academic behavior is Chelsea Huckins and Patty King.
I'm Chelsea Huckins. I teach 7th grade math at Pennachuck Middle School. This is my second year doing teacher leaders. Last year I focused on trauma and its impact in the classroom, and this year we really wanted to focus on getting that research into classrooms. So, intro, Patty King.
My name is Patty King. I teach at Pennachuck Middle School 6th grade math with Chelsea. I've been a teacher for a little over 25 years. I've served as a mentor, a scout leader, different capacities working with kids, a parent. And during the past 5 to 7 years, I've noticed some significant changes in the kids who have come before me. They are rude, disrespectful, very challenging. They are angry, withdrawn, but more than anything, I notice they lack joy, and that's very troublesome to me. And unfortunately, I started asking myself the question, what is wrong with kids these days? So this past fall, I saw Chelsea's presentation, and I had this aha moment. I realized I should not be asking the question, what is wrong with kids these days, but rather, what is happening to kids these days? And Chelsea and I started to talk, and we decided that it would be a great idea to explore some trauma-sensitive practices in our classrooms and see how we could best support those students in our in their learning environments. Hence, our question.
My last year's research, I looked into ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, and how that links to students' ability to attend school, their behavior in school, and their coursework while they're in school. We float around the word intentional non-learners. That never sat right with me. I don't feel that kids don't want to learn. That kind of sparked my interest to digging deeper into what this is actually doing to our kids and what is causing this. So this was my last year's research, kind of bringing up to speed for this year's research.
And before we look at how trauma looks in our classrooms, this is what we're dealing with. This is what kids are bringing to the classroom. These are those experiences, those adverse childhood experiences. Having a score of 3 or more, that's okay. Having a score of 3 or more is considered very high.
So as you look through that list, every time you said yes to one of those things that's happened, that counts as 1 ACE score, so that 3 ACE scores is high. And this is what it actually does to students. You can see the key points of what happens to students. And these are the things that we're realizing when Patty said what's different with kids these days. This is what we're seeing. And how that trauma impacts their ability to form relationships with their peers and adults, and their ability to perform in school. So what can we now do as teachers knowing this to help students get back on track in school and get them back into their learning?
So in a typical classroom of 30 students, 8 out of those 30 have high ACE scores. There are 5 fundamental truths to trauma. The first is that trauma is real. It's prevalent more than what we're aware of. It's toxic to the brain. Educators need to be prepared to support these children and all children, even if we don't know who these kids are. But last of all, children being resilient can learn and grow and thrive as long as they're in a positive learning environment.
So for us as teachers, it's not important for us to know students' trauma. It's not important for us to relive their trauma with them. It's just important for us to realize what it looks like. So everyone's probably heard of flight, fight, freeze, which are the normal survival modes. They've added a new one, fawn. And when students are triggered or they're stressed, they go into one of these responses, and you can see the actual characteristics of each of them and how that actually looks in your classroom. So you don't need to know the trauma, you just need to know what it looks like, which is kind of nice because we don't get that secondary trauma.
So can we just look at this? Because I just want to add to this. Pardon me?
Can we get that slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
Okay.
when I look, this is what this reminds me of that question I was asking myself, what is wrong with kids these days? This is what I would see. But then when you look at their ACEs, that's what they're bringing, and that's the difference. And that was a little inspirational, or I think comforting to me, I guess.
And also knowing what to do with these. Once you see one of these responses, what to do as a teacher, that's what we focused on, and that's what the bulk of our research, our action research was.
So now we're going to look at trauma-sensitive practices that we used in our classrooms and during our research. First of all, it's important to know that it's our responsibility as teachers to provide a learning environment where each student is safe, supported, engaged, and challenged. The strategies or practices that we looked at fall under 4 different categories. There's self-awareness, relationships, belief, and live, laugh, love.
So just to put in a plug, we both teach math, so we are under the gun for getting all of our curriculum in, and we're able to do this in our classrooms without losing instructional time, which I think is very important to put in, that we didn't lose instruction by doing this action research. So the first of those big 4 ideas is self-awareness. So what are we bringing into the classroom? And that's very important. What are our ACE scores? How is that impacting our beliefs or our assumptions or our biases about students? Understanding who we are will better understand how we can help our students in the end. Okay.
Second big idea is relationships, and personally I think this is the most important of all. The human connection is an essential component to learning. There are 3 different practices. The first practice under this big idea of relationships is to attend to our own relationships. It's important to show simple, sustained kindness to all students, to remember that it's not always what we say, but how we say it. We need to remember to develop authentic relationships, not just merely interact with our students, but really get to know them on a personal level. And one of those specific strategies is called the 2-10 strategy, whereby we spend 2 minutes with one particular student that we're focusing on every day for 10 days, talking about anything but academics, so that we're getting to know their personal interests, their goals, what's going on in their lives, and that's a way to build trust. Another practice under this big idea is to remember the difference between control and influence. We can only control ourselves, but we can influence their environment, we can influence their focus, our kindness can influence their beliefs, their behaviors, and their outcomes in the classroom. And last of all, we need to, under this, this big idea, is that we need to provide opportunities for kids to develop their own relationships, whether it's through cooperative learning activities, guiding them in groups before school, after school, during school, whatever. But we need to give them a sense, we need to give them an opportunity to develop a sense of belonging.
This one really struck a chord with me this year. I did not come across this in my research last year, was beliefs. We need to believe in our students and feel they can achieve at a higher expectation, and that they are worthy of success. When we take a kid that's going through trauma or has been through trauma and we cut them some slack and we lower the expectations for that child, there's an unspoken message that that child's not worthy of behaving, or that child's not worthy of succeeding. And if we set the bar high for all kids and help them get there, no matter what their background is, then we can send that belief that they are capable and they are worth it.
And the last big idea is live, laugh, and love. We need to find the joy in teaching every day, however challenging that can be. There are 3 ideas under this, or 3 practices under this big idea. The first one is that happy teachers have happy classrooms. It's essential to show grace and provide positive feedback on a regular basis and make sure that feedback is genuine. And last, as we all know, to best serve those under our care, we need to take care of ourselves.
All right, this one's info heavy, and it is in your packet. On the left side, you'll see that those are the characteristics of a non-trauma informed classroom. And last year when I started my research, I kind of went through and I saw what am I doing that might not be so trauma informed. And I started, and if you read right across, it's the trauma informed compare characteristic. And I started kind of switching over some of the less desirable things I was doing in my classroom to make my classroom more trauma informed. So you can kind of take that with you. It's a lot to digest in one slide, so hence the handout. You can also see the left side's more of a fixed mindset, going to that growth and fixed mindset, and the right side's more of a growth mindset model.
So our action research, this is sort of fun. We had 4 teachers, 20 students, 5 weeks, 1 toolkit, 3 types of responses. 4 teachers spent 5 weeks using 1 or more of the trauma-sensitive practices. They worked with 1 student in each of their classes. And the teachers, each teacher worked on a different trigger response: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And the student-teacher interactions were recorded as positive, negative, or no response. Data was analyzed to determine what, if any, behavior or academic change resulted. This chart shows the responses from each of the different triggers and teachers. Most of the responses were positive. The fawn student, that's the one that is very needy, always seeks approval, a people pleaser. A lot of non-responses there. And then the fight students had a couple of negative responses. Their anger became a little bit more intensive. But the positive responses were either shown through an ability to refocus on tasks, or their behaviors de-escalated.
So going through all of the triggers, fawn, those are your people pleasers, and they're very dependent on the teacher. So those strategies for dealing with students that exhibit a fawn trigger are facilitating relationships with their classmates. They typically don't have good peer-to-peer relationships. Encouraging independence, so weaning them off being so dependent on the teacher's either approval or trying to please the teacher, and getting to know them on a personal level so you can connect with them differently than them just trying to please you. For this one, mostly non-responses. From what I learned last year with doing this, I don't think 5 weeks is enough for a fawn kid. They need a lot longer of a growth or time for really to get them to see that growth in that kind of student.
With a student who exhibits fight triggers or responds to fight triggers, it's super important to make sure that we anticipate any changes with them. They have a difficult time with changes. It's important to validate their feelings, but also hold them accountable. This is one student who will act out and they'll push our buttons, but holding them accountable is what they want. It's not what they articulate, it's what they need. And when it happens consistently over time, we'll see a positive response.
For math, this is probably the most common, freeze. They see it and they just go, don't know what to do. So I find this one is most helpful for me in the math classroom. So some strategies to dealing with a student who exhibits freeze behaviors is forming connections, walking by their desk and just say, hey, can I help you? Instead of being like, get to work. They're usually very receptive to that. Not judging them for not working or being frozen in that moment. And also keeping them accountable. So giving them no opt-out and helping them get through the work versus just letting them not do the work. And the findings for this one was mostly positive. Students definitely increased work production, either started working or they got stuck midway and then they started working again, which in math is very common.
All of these types of kiddos are challenging and they push our buttons in different ways. And this type is one that pushes my buttons, but the least of all, I think. This is the one that is my favorite to deal with, the flight, the one who seeks to take flight. It's important to build a relationship with all of these students, but building a relationship with a flight student is done through many positive connections. Using that 2-10 strategy is valuable for this student. Other strategies that I've used, using mindfulness activities, playing classical music, changing my speech to low, slow, but again, this student needs a very structured environment, one that is quiet, not a lot of activity going on, just a very relaxed but structured, predictable environment.
All right, and our next one is recommendations. I'm sorry I just threw 2 years of research at you. It's very dense, and there's a lot, and I don't think we even covered the surface of what this this topic actually really includes. But we would like to start a book study with Fostering Resilient Learners moving forward. That was probably the backbone of our research for both years. And they also include a teacher self-care challenge, and they also have a bunch of self-awareness kind of workbook that teachers can go through to start getting to know your own beliefs, triggers, and how that impacts the learning environment. So that's kind of all, it's 3 steps, but it's kind of all wrapped in one. And then start promoting this, getting more classrooms into this trauma-sensitive classroom mindset, and then also making sure we train our incoming staff as well. And we'll leave you with this.
instead of trying to fix our kids, we need to be there to provide relentless support and to make sure they have an environment that is positive, that is safe, that's engaging, and
All right.
Time and money and.
Anything else?